that was the first little taster. And I'm like, I don't know what this is, but I'm all in. Welcome to the Alive and Aligned podcast, a show dedicated to helping you live a life of truth and share your fullest gifts with the world. I'm your host, Pete Byrne, and I'm here to open your mind to new perspectives, to introduce you to some epic humans who are already out there living their deepest truth. So now just grounding in, taking a breath, letting go of anything you're still holding onto from today, and just opening up to receiving this episode now. Let's dive on in. Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to this solo episode of the Alive and Aligned podcast entitled All About Breathwork. So as the title suggests, I'm going to be talking, you guessed it, all about breathwork and what breathwork is and what it isn't, and why might it be becoming so popular in the world these days. From our old mate Wim Hof over in the Netherlands getting in the ice and breaking world records to various, practices and clips been posted on Instagram. I kind of feel like breathwork is like the new yoga or the new meditation. It's like a practice that is very easy to do. It's right there in front of us, and yet can be very profound. And yet there's a lot of different versions of it, and there can be a lot of confusion around breathwork. So I really want to use this episode as a way of talking about my experience of breathwork, the different forms and types, and why specifically I love body-based breathwork and the technique I'm practicing called facilitated breath repatterning, or FBR, and how it can potentially change your life, or without the right tools in place can also be quite a challenging experience that can create some negative effects as well. So we really want to just create a roadmap and a bit of an explanation as to if this is something that you are curious about and learning more about. I hope that in this episode I can map all that out for you and you know the way. So as I mentioned, there's many types of breathwork, and I remember like years ago having, of all people, an astrologer tell me that I should really get into breathwork with a specific kind of practitioner, and I had like not really thought much about it and kind of ignored it, And then many years later, I found myself in Bali. This was in April 2020, and I'd been going through a couple of years of some pretty challenging stuff. I'd pretty much had like a health crisis and a nervous system breakdown on stage. That's what I now kind of would label it as and recognize it as. At the time, it just felt my body gave up on me. I was partying, I was burnt out, I was just like, I just crashed basically. My body just, in the middle of a show on stage, just like kind of started like, my hands were like shaking and I lost like some of my vision, and it was just like really intense. And that kind of lasted in my system for weeks, and even months afterwards. I'd be walking around and I would just want to kind of collapse, really. It was really challenging. I had no idea really what was happening. So, I was really trying lots of different things. I was trying, the diet piece. I was trying, fasting and raw foods and detox and herbs. I was doing the meditations. I got really into Joe Dispenza's meditations and listening to, different stuff around like using the mind to change the body. And, I started doing sound healing and yoga and Reiki. I did all these trainings, and I was like, wow, okay, like this is, I was really open to that world, and it felt good. It felt like I was on the right path, but it still didn't really feel like the thing. It was like, it felt like a lot of input and not a lot of output. And I still was being faced with a lot of these challenges of like low energy, dizziness, just feeling flighty and not really grounded in myself. Sometimes almost nauseous and short of breath, and just in this fight or flight state a lot of the time. And it felt like the bottom could drop out from underneath me anytime. And I was still going around doing all these very high tone activity things. I was still playing shows. I was traveling. I was moving through these different, environments, meeting people. And I was really playing this balancing act of like all my time was like working on stage, playing gigs. And then I'd go home and just have to like crash for a while. And it really, like, I can't say, like, life was still good, but it was still, there was a lot of challenge, and I really couldn't understand what was up. So, I was hanging out in Bali at the beginning of the pandemic, and, a friend of mine just had been to see this guy called Edward and done a breathwork session, and he'd said, wow, there's this really deep, profound experience. And I said, you know what, like, I'm here, I'll give it a go. So I went on and booked to do a session the next day with this guy, Edward Dangerfield. And I went into his office and sat down, and, we talked a little bit, and then I lay up on the table and I was like, well, what do I do? And he's like, just lay back, I'll guide you, And all I can say is like an hour later, I came out of that experience and I sat up, and it was like I was finally like, I was here, I was present. And it was just like the colors outside were brighter. It was like I was on psychedelics or something, because everything was so vivid and bright. And at the time, I didn't know what it was. I was just like, what the fuck is going on here? Like later, if I was to look back on that experience now, I'd say that I was, finally finding some deep rest in my system, a deep parasympathetic state, one could say. And it was almost like coming out of a chronic fight or flight state. For a moment, my body could recognize actually more of my environment, because when we're in a high tone fight or flight state, we're, running from the tiger, we're only focused on escape. We're one point of focus. We can't smell the roses and see those colors around us. And actually, when we can relax the body and the nervous system, all of this becomes available. Like our peripheral vision reopens and we start to see life and experience life in a whole new way. So that was the first little taster. And I'm like, I don't know what this is, but I'm all in. In very true Pete fashion, going just head first into it. So what happened next was I started going to group events, and I started luckily I was a musician and I was able to come along and, play a couple of songs at the end of the group events. And, really through COVID in Bali, every week I used to go on a Wednesday, and it was just like a ritual where I'd go and lie down and breathe, okay, in this connected way. And I'll get into that later as to what the technique was. But, more and more I started to dive into the breath, and I started to tap into these parts of myself that had been effectively repressed or avoided, and start to become the witness and notice the different breathing and behavioral patterns that were showing up in my system and in my life. And I started to notice wow, I see how I'm doing this. And I started to find new ways of expression and tapping into shadowed parts and parts of me that I'd repressed or avoided or believed weren't welcome, and just kind of hid. And what that started to do over time is really just change who I was and change how I was showing up. And, luckily life threw me some really interesting tests, gauntlets to really try that on. I was going through a challenging breakup and having to navigate that situation, and noticing in me when my system wanted to collapse and wanted to drop into this victim mode and drop into this just really despair, and my world is ending and why is this happening to me? Actually, what I found underneath that was a deeper resolve and resilience of no, I actually have the ability and the capacity to hold myself through this, which was totally a new level. It was a full testing of that, what I'd been building and working on for 5 or 6 months previous without realizing. It was just it felt good. I kept doing it. And then here was a real example of life dealing me a hand that, if I told that situation to anyone else around me, they're holy shit, how are you even still here? How are you surviving and going through this? And I'm actually thriving and loving the challenge. That was how things had flipped. So it really, on many levels was impacting my life in a great way. And I knew from the first moment I kind of started stepping into that world, I'm going to teach this. I'm going to go down this route and practice this. I'm going to share this work with the world. So that's what I did. I've been, I trained just over 2 years ago as a practitioner, and I've been working, all over the world and taking this around the place and sharing this with people on an in-person basis. And we'll again get to why it's an only in-person basis very shortly. But yeah, it's insanely impacted my life in the sense of I can't even begin to mention the amount of benefits I've received from this practice. It's beyond life change. I feel my life has changed a number of times because of my experience with this and of regulating the nervous system, of letting go of these deep embodied traumas and emotions and fears and just rewriting the stories and getting to go back and effectively reparent myself and change the way I see the world. And what I've noticed is that, my ability to live from a place of truth, to follow my purpose, to, only attract in people who are aligned and, communicate effectively and letting go of toxic, relationships and people and patterns and environments, and really just finding a new sense of just self-worth really at the bottom of it all. And it's really influenced how I do work in the world. Even if I'm just coaching someone online, the level of depth that I've seen people go to and supported people in the depth of their shame or despair or pain in a breathwork setting, while they're in this, journey in an altered state. Now I can really I've seen the deepest depths of a lot of humans. And so I can really, have compassion for that. And I can see how surface level behaviors can all be linked to these deeper unmet needs or incomplete reflexes that we might be storing under the surface, which is pretty cool. A little coconut break. So what I want to dive into today, first of all, is starting with the choice point, which is really what types of breathwork exist? What is it? If you're just coming here and you're listening, breathwork, I heard about it, tell me more. So I'm going to start off by telling you, okay, we've got two types of breathwork. So on the right-hand side, we've got mind-based breathwork, okay? So that would be similar to like Wim Hof, which I was practicing and I was trying that out and it felt really good. And that would also be equivalent to like a box breath or a yoga pranayama or any kind of technique that involves me using my mind to control my breath. So what that looks like is I might get up in the morning, as I do, and I might sit down and do like a breath of fire, which is an activating breath, which stimulates like the nervous system and gets the breath moving and activates that whole like diaphragm region and gets everything moving. So that would, sound something like a, where I'm pulsing breath in and out of my body. And that's a quite activating breath. That's going to leave me, as soon as I get up, leave me feeling more activated in my system. So that's a pretty, repeatable practice that I could do every morning. Another thing I might do is a box breath, which is, I would sit down and I would inhale and hold and then exhale and hold for even counts. So I might inhale for 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in, hold, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, and hold at the bottom of the exhale for 5. And if I was to do that for, 10, 15 minutes, what that would start to do is it would start to balance my system out. And again, it's very repeatable. If I stand up off my cushion afterwards, I'm going to feel pretty much the same way most mornings after that. It's a good thing for balancing the system. Another mind-based practice could be something like a physiological sigh, which has been proven. Our friend Andrew Huberman was posting there recently about how the physiological sigh has been shown to decrease stress. And the reason it does that is because we're using our mind to deliberately bring through a sigh response and an exhale, which is a signal to the vagus nerve in the system to basically downshift. So if I go, which is one long inhale followed by a little sip, and then a sigh with maybe sound or just breath on the exhale, what that's doing is it's saying to the system, we're good, we're safe, you can chill out. And it relaxes the vagus nerve, it relaxes the whole system, the heartbeat slows down, our system moves into that rest and digest state. And again, if I do that consistently for a number of minutes, I'm going to create a more parasympathetic dominant state in my body, which is going to make me feel more relaxed. And that's again repeatable. So we've got, if we want to get G'd up and activated, we do our breath of fire. If we want to balance, we do our box breath, inhale, hold, exhale, hold. And if we want to relax the system, we can do a physiological sigh. And they're all available. So just know that those practices, you can go on YouTube, you can find people doing these and you can learn about these and go nuts, So those practices, the mind-based breathwork practices are awesome for, if we're living a hectic life or we want to, get more activated in our life or just balance ourselves out, we can use our mind to change our breath, which will change the function of our glands and our system. And that's really effective and helpful. Now, one of the downsides of the mind-based breathwork practices, okay, is that as soon as I get up, okay, and walk out the door, my system is going to go back to the same way it's been breathing pretty much for many years, my whole life, okay? So it's really good to, have a short-term acute change in the system, but in terms of a long-term basis, it takes a long time to create real neuroplastic change in the body just by doing a morning breath practice, mind-based breath practice, basically, because, we're just working with whatever's on the surface level, and then we just regress back to what we knew before. It's like the body remembers and it goes back to what's familiar. And so that can be challenging because if we're living in an environment for many years, that's very, very activating. So let's say I grew up in a household or an environment that, really was quite, a vibrant household energetically. Everyone's on the go and there's a lot of energy and maybe high voices been used and maybe shouting and sometimes anger and, everyone's really living this, hectic kind of life. And maybe you're living in a city and, you go outside and there's traffic and there's always noise, there's always buzzing and something happening, okay? Our system basically adapts to that to feel normal and comfortable in that. Otherwise we'd be overwhelmed all the time. So our neuroplastic system, the nervous system, adjusts itself to feel that okay, I can be in this all the time and that feels normal, okay? And what's happening in that is then our breath starts to mirror the state of our nervous system. It's kind of like a chicken and egg scenario where as we, are in a more activated state, the breath mirrors that. And then that creates different physiological response in the body, which then creates more of that same tone. So, if I'm living in a fear state, I'm going to be breathing quite shallow in my chest, You know, if I repeat that for long enough time, then my system, my glands, my adrenal glands are going to continue to produce adrenaline, cortisol. They're going to start to, you know, remind me, say, hey, you're in this fear state. Okay, keep going, keep going. And it just becomes this almost downward spiral loop that if that sets as our dominant pattern or one of our main patterns that we go to over time, then, you know, we can go about our day and like be very activated when we're going around the city. But then when we come home and sit down on the couch and we want to relax, you know, we're stuck in this pattern of just activation. And that's where, you know, our quality of sleep is impacted. That's where, you know, our digestion is impacted. And that's where like our ability to just have energy throughout the day, and it becomes a downward spiral. And this is why people like doing all the biohacking and, you know, optimizing their diet and, you know, their fitness routine and, you know, trying to look at sleep and stuff. It's like, actually, they're missing the answer. It's right there under their nose. It's the breath. The breath is dictating all of these, you know, all these different functions. Like without effective breath and dynamic breath across many different like situations and environments and ability to move between these different states, it kind of doesn't really matter what you're eating, because if you're just living in fight or flight all the time, and that's like, you know, repeated, and like you're held in that because of the limited breath patterns you have available to you, you know, you're not going to digest your food properly because you're consistently running from the tiger instead of grazing in the fields. You know what I mean? So this is where the limitations of a mind-based practice comes in. It takes a long time to really create deep neuroplastic change in the nervous system. Okay. So that's where we come to this left side, the other side of the equation, which is body-based breathwork, somatic-based breathwork, okay, which is what I am all about, okay? And this form of, you know, breathwork I'm trained in is called conscious connected breathwork. That's the technique, okay? And how that differs from the mind-based breathwork is that in the beginning, we're going to start to bring our mind to our breath and loop the breath. So we connect the inhale with the exhale, which sounds so simple, but it's just like a... And as soon as we're reaching the top of the inhale, we're letting go. And as soon as we reach the bottom of the exhale, we're inhaling. And we just do that consistently over time. And what starts to happen is we start to shift and change our blood chemistry. We start to change the way our body functions. And in doing that, the mind gets to switch off and the body gets to take over. The body gets to come along and go, all right, here we go. We're moving into this slightly altered state. There's different areas and regions of the brain opening up. And this is where we start to basically kind of take off the cloak of who we believe we are, and we get to start to look at what's going on under the surface. We're opening up the hood of the car and checking what's going on in the engine here. And what's really interesting in that is that we get to start to activate and look at parts of ourselves, or maybe incomplete reflexes or emotions that we haven't had the chance to experience in maybe a very long time. Another little coconut break there. So that's really effective and powerful, because what that allows us to do is, once we're in this slightly altered state, there's a lot that can happen, okay? Now, many forms of connected breathwork, you know, this is something that is becoming big. You might see occasionally people on Instagram posting reels of people in these crazy exorcist-like experiences. Like we call it being in process, where there's an emotional process alive. And, you know, for me, it's not really an integrity to be putting videos of people doing this kind of mad stuff online. It's quite a like an intimate and a sacred experience to move through these deep, you know, processes and emotions and relive memories, and then to stick it on Instagram probably isn't the best move for me. But a lot of people use connected breathwork as a tool because you can get really damn high. You can just go for it, and you can like just rapidly extend yourself and hyperventilate effectively. And a lot of connected breathwork practitioners will be like one facilitator and a room of like 60 people, and they're all hyperventilating and getting into these like weird altered states and like seeing God and leaving their bodies. And it's like, oh my God, this is so amazing. Okay. And for me, that's all well and good if that's what you're about. If you want to have some kind of peak experience, like you could also just go and take ecstasy and go to the nightclub, you know, if that's what you're about, you know. However, I think doing it in that way is totally missing the point, because what we're actually doing in that state, like in using connected breathwork, the epic tool of connected breathwork in that way, is effectively driving the nervous system into a fight or flight state. And a lot of times there's not proper integration. There's not proper like ability for the nervous system to balance out. And there's not really any change happening in the nervous system either, okay? Just like the mind-based practice, we're just creating a big experience. Maybe we have a big release, but like who really knows what happened, okay? So what I love about the technique of FBR, facilitated breath repatterning, which is what I've been trained in, is we can use the tool of connected breathwork, this somatic-based, body-based breathwork practice, to actually change the way the nervous system functions, okay? So this is where we start to look at reading rhythms of breath and seeing that when we put someone into this slightly altered state with a connected, a looped breath, okay, and their body starts to move into breath patterns and emotions and experiences that maybe have been held under the surface. Kind of like they've got, on your computer, you've got all these tabs open in the background, okay? And you don't know that they're draining the battery, but then you pull up Task Manager and you're like, holy shit, this app is draining like 70% of my battery every day, and that's why my battery's been running out all the time. So we get to go in and look at all these tabs that are open in the background and see our default patterns. And what I'm trained to do in that sense as a facilitator is to come in and to read how breath is moving through the pelvic floor, through the diaphragm and the rib cage, and also through the chest and the vocal cords and the throat, and start to shift and change the way the body breathes, okay? So it can find more easefulness and more flow in breath, okay? And so that any adaptive patterns that have been learned over the years, like you're living in New York City and you learn to breathe only in your chest and you're living in a fight or flight response or a high tone state all the time, I might start to invite someone to breathe into a different area of their body, like down into their belly, down into their pelvis. And that's going to create more grounding and more balance and more sense of just like being able to really downshift and relax and more fullness, okay? And once there's a new way available, like kind of like you've been driving the same route through traffic every day, for 1 hour, and then I show you that there's a route through a nice waterfall and there's some mountains and a lake and you can drive in this beautiful scenic view. How many times do I have to show you the scenic view route, that's 30 minutes, until you stop taking the 1 hour route through, the city with the traffic? And so that's kind of what's available in terms of this body-based breathwork practice, okay? And what usually tends to happen is, right, in a journey, we might start to, drop in, lie down, connect our breath, and we're guided in by a practitioner, okay? And then after a certain number of minutes, maybe 5 to 7 minutes, we move into a slightly altered state where we can become the witness and we can start to notice our body and our breath. And we almost notice that like the body is taken over on autopilot and it starts to breathe itself. And we can just watch and be like, oh, this is interesting. This is cool. Breath is just moving and I don't have to do anything. And then within that, we start to see what comes alive. So maybe someone might experience cramping and tingling and even we call it tetany, where the hands get all mangled, and people who've experienced styles of breathwork such as holotropic breathwork or very intense forms of breathwork usually end up having this because they're hyperventilating. However, what we promote in FBR, this form of connected breathwork, is a relaxed exhale where the vibrancy of our inhale is meeting the same quality of relaxation on the exhale. So that's the yin and the yang. It's the masculine, feminine. It's the the balance that we want to find in our lives. Like, how activated can I be while also remaining relaxed? Because, if that tiger comes in the room, and he's going to eat me, I don't want to hyperventilate and go and pass out, okay? I want to be like, okay, and I'm here and I'm present, and where do I go? And I'm looking for a window, I'm looking for an escape, okay? That's going to be much better for my survival. Same way when I'm in a very challenging situation in my life, I don't want to just check out, I don't want to disassociate or just flip out. I want to stay balanced and present while also remaining activated. And likewise, going through this experience, a 1 hour breathwork journey, we'll explore the sympathetic side of the nervous system and how much activation can we be in while remaining centered and present. But then when we shift into the later stages of the journey, it moves into a deep relaxation, and that's where we're training the parasympathetic nervous system. And what that does is it trains our body's ability to move from activation into deep relaxation. So, if you've come home from a tough day of work and you've been crushing it out all day, you want to be able to downshift quickly. So for some people, it might take them 4 hours to go from this, go mode during the day down into actually being able to rest and recover. So what I like to do is train my body to go from that in, 5 to 10 minutes. I can shift from this really activated state into a deep relaxed state. And what happens is, in this altered state with a looped breath, we can much better show and train the body to find that new pathway, that 30-minute route through the nice fields with the river, So when I come home then, after a long day of work, my body now knows a new way and it's been trained in. And if I have enough integration time at the end of that 1 hour experience where I can just lie there, everything kind of resets in the system and I get up and I walk out and I literally breathe differently. My system operates differently than it did when I walked in. And if I continue to do that over a period of a number of weeks, that's where we start to create deep neuroplastic change, where I can feel more activation and capacity in my day to day and be able to do more and enjoy it more and be more present, And then at the same time, when I want to rest, I'm not stuck in this, like in my mind, or needing to work, or like knowing that I should rest, but I just keep going and going and going because that's the program. It can't stop. So that's kind of like a little bit of an intro to this as to like what body-based breathwork is, and why it's pretty cool. Some of the things that are important I'm going to explore in another episode, like what are some of the outcomes that can come from exploring this as a technique. Like it's literally endless. Every human is completely different in their life experience. Everyone has totally different breath patterns. No two breaths are ever the same. So it's a very dynamic, always changing practice. So we could really I could sit here and talk to you about this all day, to be honest. But the most important thing is that in repatterning the breath, we're changing the function of the nervous system. We're changing the way we experience the world, and therefore like what we're capable of doing. And what I've found, particularly for people who are seeking that deeper feeling of like worthiness, or finding purpose in their lives, or, really finding fulfillment in their relationships, or, just feeling more joy and fulfillment and happiness in life. This is the highway one. It's the fast track. It's the Swiss Army knife. It's like, that's going to be the thing that gets you there if you're in the right environment and there's different protocols in place. So what I want to close out with in this exploration of breathwork, okay, is some of the things that if you want to explore breathwork, here are some of the things you want to maybe think about or look out for. The first thing is, if you're going to do a mind-based practice, I've already listed a couple of potential things that you could try out. Again, just tuning into your system, starting slow, not over driving yourself, because you can actually, we can actually do a lot. Like the breath is powerful, it can be a lot, and we can sometimes discount it a bit because we're breathing every day and we don't think about it much, but it is a very powerful tool, and we can get super altered and even drop ourselves into some, really interesting and sometimes challenging states as a result of over breathing or under breathing. So just being wary of that. If you're looking to explore a body-based practice, okay, it depends on where in the world you are, okay? There's a lot of people that offer connected breathwork workshops and, seminars and events. And the first thing I'm going to say is don't fucking do it online, all right? Don't do it online. The reason I say that is because there's a subtle nuance to being guided by someone in person. In this age of Zoom and AI and all this technology happening, okay, there's a quality to the nervous system that just doesn't really resonate with an online work, okay? Yes, again, you can drive yourself into some kind of state and have some kind of an experience, but when we're talking about creating deep, like lasting change in the nervous system, being supported with touch and with presence in person is, it's you can't really compare it. It's incomparable. So, the best case scenario of an online setting is that, you might have some kind of an experience and it might open a door or two, but you're never really going to go that deep, because the level of safety and, how safe the body feels is, a direct correlation to its environment. Okay. So if you're in a room with someone that has a lot of experience and you've done a number of sessions with, and you felt what it feels like to receive touch, and you're safe to go in, you feel safe to go into these places, the level of change that can happen much faster, much quicker it's on a different level. So at the best case scenario, you're going to maybe have some cool experiences, but the worst case scenario on the other side is of an online exploration is that, you're going to drop into some breath patterns maybe, and maybe activate some stuff. And if you're not there with someone in person who can guide you through that, okay, and you're on Zoom and the internet cuts out, or you're on headphones, or like you're looking at a little window on Zoom, whatever, it's impossible to really, honestly, truly track someone's nervous system in that way, I believe, and give them the support that they really need in that moment. And what you're at risk of doing is potentially like bringing up something and maybe re-traumatizing, bringing up some kind of past experience and not actually finding the completion to it. And now it's active and alive in the system. So that's really why when people say, oh, we can just do it online, it's like, no, because actually, even though there might be some benefits, the potential outlying risk is way higher, and it's just not worth it. Okay. So if you're going to try to find a practitioner to do some connected breathwork with, ideally you'd want to do it in a one-on-one setting. Okay. The big group stuff just it's not really serving many people if it's not been held. Or if it isn't a group setting, you want to find where it's maybe one practitioner to every 5 or 6 breathers, okay? Where it's like, there's a level of presence and safety that's there where someone can truly keep track of the amount of breathers in the room, okay? So everyone's going on their journey. Different people will go into different emotions at different times. And then it's just up to that practitioner to really keep an eye on everyone. So if there's 50 people in a room and one person banging a drum, they're not going to be able to actually effectively keep track on everyone. And then you're kind of on your own, and then you may as well be at home doing it by yourself. And these are honestly, when I hear people talk about, breathwork, I tried that, I didn't like it, I had this really traumatic experience, it's usually because they've been to some kind of environment like this. So I really recommend just not doing that, okay? What I recommend is, based on where you are, finding a, trauma-informed, nervous system aware practitioner who's able to work with those and is able to explain those different pieces to you, like what it means to, find balance and regulation in the nervous system. How do they know how to spot and complete a trauma response or a reflex? Otherwise, basically, where people just don't really know they don't know what they don't know, and they don't know the potential dangers of what they could be creating in someone's systems, because it's only breath, right? What's the worst that can happen? And it's kind of just like giving someone mushrooms or ayahuasca and throwing them on a roller coaster. It's like, it's not really actually serving anyone. So in conclusion, breath work, epic, powerful, potentially life-changing, as it has changed my life. Some drawbacks is that, if done in the wrong environment without the proper safety and support, it can, have a negative impact. It can actually do more harm than good. So really important to find a one-on-one practitioner who is nervous system, trained, aware of trauma, and is able to, safely guide, one-on-one sessions or a small group. If you're coming to Bali, come see us, Breathwork Bali. That's always good fun. And we've got, 5 nights a week, there's group events, and, there's like 40 practitioners, so there's a really good team. There's practitioners from that school scattered around the world. Currently, there's, a number in Germany. There's like Estonia, there's the US, there's, I think Canada, there's UK as well. So Ireland, there's a number of people scattered around the place. So just really kind of seeking out someone in your local area that at least, has some awareness of these pieces. And ultimately, opening to the idea of like a body-based practice instead of a mind-based practice as one of the most effective ways to dive into and support your deeper pursuit of worthiness, purpose, fulfillment in life. I really highly recommend it. It's, as I said, changed my life many times. And I hope that this episode has planted some kind of seed as to like what's possible, and also like what to look out for, and how you can avoid, some pitfalls that, are inevitably laid out in the route. And as breathwork and connected breathwork starts to become more and more Instagrammable and popular, that you can avoid some of those worst case scenarios and find that, deeper level of self and the real kind of positive experience that I believe is available with this practice. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.